Okay, recording started. Welcome, everyone. Get settled here just to make sure everybody gets in. Bear with me just a sec. Okay. As you see on your screen, we will be recording today's session. So hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Charlie Shepard, and I am the AARP Nevada State President, and would like to welcome everyone to today's discussion, how to vote in the Nevada primary and what you need to know. AARP is nonpartisan and does not endorse, support, or contribute to candidates, but we do advocate for the 50+ population here in Nevada and across the United States. AARP wants to ensure that everyone knows how to make their voice heard by casting their vote in the upcoming Nevada primary, and then, of course, the general election in November. We have with us today the Nevada Deputy Secretary of State, Mark Wlaschin, as well as from the Latin Chamber of Commerce, Maite Salazar. And our host for today's conversation is the AARP Nevada Director of Government Relations, Barry Gold. But before I turn this session over to Mr. Gold and the panel, I have just a couple of housekeeping matters for our attendees, which of course include manners. If you would please make sure that your microphone is muted. And if you have a question, please type it into the chat. And as time permits, we will be addressing those questions. On that note, Barry, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie, and thanks for everybody who joined in today. I think Charlie said it well. AARP has a long history of what we call voter engagement. It's not voter education, it's voter engagement. We want everybody to understand and know how they can make their voice heard. That's what it's all about. That's hopefully why you're all here, to find out what any changes might be and how you can make your voice heard in the primary election. We're going to talk about some dates. We're going to talk about some timelines and registrations. I know we talked before everybody joined in. What we'll be doing is some of the websites and phone numbers. We'll go ahead and we'll put in the chat so people know how to do that, because otherwise it's like, how quickly did he say that phone number? So that'll kind of help you. So I think we can get started. This is going to be very conversational. I have a list of questions that I really think people are very interested in, want to know. The primary election's right around the corner. Early voting starts this weekend. So people need to know what's going on. They need to know how to make their voice heard and the best way to do that. So before I get started, I know we had very brief introductions. So Mark Wlaschin from Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, and Maite from representing the Latin Chamber of Commerce. If there's anything you'd like to introduce yourself or anything you'd like to say, please do that now, and then I'll just go ahead and start asking you guys some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Barry. Again, my name is Mark Velosh, and I'm the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections. I work for Secretary of State Barbara Sagaski. I've been working with her for since mid-2019 now, but I was appointed as the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections in October of 2020, and certainly happy to be here today.
Hi, my name is Maite Salazar. I'm VP of Special Projects for the Latin Chamber of Commerce, and I've been involved with the Latin Chamber since I moved here in 2004. I've helped them with some Latino outreach and developing some special training programs targeting, of course, our growing Hispanic community in Las Vegas.
Well, I want to thank you both again so much for being here, and I know this will be a good discussion. I guess the first question is people want to know is, what are the options for voting in the primary? What are the different ways people can make their voice heard?
Perfect, Barry. I'll start with that one if it's okay. So options to vote in the primary election. So first and foremost, I do want to remind everyone that it is a closed primary system that we have here in Nevada. And I suspect you're probably going to hear me say that phrase too quite a bit here in Nevada, right? Because a couple of things I want to point out. First of all, again, every state's different. Every state has different rules and timelines and those sorts of things. So our discussion today, I will stress, is going to talk about what impacts us here in Nevada. So the options and how to vote in a closed primary. So a closed primary system, again, is a process by which the major parties are able to choose their candidates that are going to the general election. and there is a selection as well for nonpartisan offices that occurs. So how can you vote in this election? You can vote in person. As you mentioned, early voting starts this coming Saturday on the 28th. We'll go through June 10th, and then election day is June 14th. So you can either vote in person during early voting or in person on election day. You also have a mail ballot. All active registered voters will be sent a mail ballot. That was a change that came out of the 2021 legislative session. It was Assembly Bill 321 that was passed. So every active registered voter will have a mail ballot sent to them. And those mail ballots are kind of working their way through the mail stream right now. So those are really the big primary ways. There's also opportunities for military and overseas voters and members of the disabled community to vote in a slightly different system as well, called EASE, the Effective Absentee System for Elections. But perhaps we could talk about that in a little bit.
So that's great. Let me ask you a question. So there's no such thing as absentee ballots anymore. So everyone who's an active registered voter will be getting a mail ballot.
That's correct. Exactly. You know, and even that was a question that came up a lot in 2020, the difference between an absentee ballot and a mail ballot. The truth is they're the exact same. The document that you look at, there's no difference at all from an absentee ballot and a mail ballot. The difference really is in the requesting process. We used to have a process by which you could request an absent ballot. And now, again, pursuant to Assembly Bill 321, every active registered voter will get that mail ballot sent to them, not just for the primary, but for the general and, in fact, any other election that they're eligible to vote in.
And you mentioned that people the mail ballots are winding their way through the mail system. So if people are worried and if they don't get one in the next few days or the next week, who can they call? Who can they find out about it?
You know, that's a great question. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to post something in the chat real fast. The ideal person to talk to is your county election official, your county clerk or registrar. And I've got a website that I just posted in the chat that goes right to a list on the Secretary of State's website that lists the county clerk contact information. So calling or emailing those individuals across the state is the ideal thing to do. If you think you should have gotten a ballot by now and haven't, certainly reach out to them and they will be able to help address that.
Okay. Let's go back a step. So people who are registered should all be getting ballots. How do people register to vote? And if you haven't registered to vote yet, is there still time to do that? And what do they do? How do they do that?
Certainly. Again, we've got a couple processes in place. But the bottom line is it's possible to register all the way up through election day through the process called same-day voter registration or same-day registration. Again, that same list of contact numbers. If you have not yet registered to vote, you can certainly contact your county election official and let them know. If you go to registertovote.nv.gov, it's possible to initiate a registration. You'll still need to follow up with some additional paperwork. And even all the way up to the close of polls. There are some slight differences in the requirements, but bottom line is you can register to vote and cast a ballot up to the close of polls on election day.
That's great to know that people can do that. So if you're not registered, you can actually go to the poll and vote. You may have to bring a few more things, but that's great to know. Let's talk a little bit about the Latin Chamber and the Hispanic community. I know as the population continues to increase, Maite, can you tell us about the importance of the Hispanic vote here in Nevada and what that means?
Yes, I actually have some numbers. I'm just going to quickly go through the numbers that will really stand out. So from 1970 to 2020, the U.S. Census shows a growth in the Hispanic population from 4.5% of the U.S. population in 1970 to 19.4% of the U.S. population in 2020. So there's a huge growth in Hispanics across the country. But in Nevada, particularly, the growth is even greater. So the Nevada population grew from 2010 to 2019, the Nevada population grew from 12.3%, while the US population only grew by 6.3%. So the proportion of growth in the Hispanic community is much greater here in Nevada. So the Hispanic Latino population in Nevada was estimated at 29.2% compared to 18.5% for the US. So we have a larger concentration of Hispanics here in Nevada. And if you look at, elections across the different states, you can see the margins, sometimes for certain elected offices can be very narrow. So the vote is very important. It's very important to get the Hispanics out voting and, raising their voices and making their voices heard.
So let me ask a follow-up question to that, and Mark, you may have some information. So in terms of different populations at the polling places, are there translators available, and are mail ballots available in different languages to help people, in lots of different languages?
A great question, and something that we continue to work on improving. There are minimum requirements that the federal government has identified through a process relating to the census, where the state and the county election officials are required to provide certain information in certain languages. So here in Nevada, for example, Clark County is required to provide all election information, not only in English, but also in Spanish and Tagalog. But we also have a Native American requirement in Nye County as well for Shoshone. But in addition to that, I will tell you that across the state too, there is an interest and certainly an opportunity for individuals that are eager to help out. We're looking for interpreters, translators. So if that's something that somebody is interested in providing and willing to help out, it's a unique skill set and certainly one that will help, again, voters across the state. When in doubt, again, or if you have any interest at all, by all means, please reach out to your election officials at the county level, and they'll be able to help, facilitate that.
Well, that was my next question, and that's, do you still need poll workers, and do you still need translators, and how can they reach out and find that out?
The short answer is yes. It's something that in various locations across the state, they may have some or maybe enough, right now, but I will tell you that anyone that's interested in being a poll worker, certainly reach out again using that same contact information I put into the chat, and your county election official will be able to work with you. It's not always the case where you have to commit to a full 3 or 6 weeks of time. If you're only able to help out on certain days, again, the help is appreciated. And again, your election officials across the state want people to be involved, right? Like this is such an important civic duty and responsibility that the more people we can involve as workers and train and show the behind the scenes, the better off we all are.
Let me ask you, Maite, do you think that language is sometimes or could be a barrier for people in the Hispanic community or other multiculturals in terms of making their voice heard? Do you think language gets in the way for them?
I think that for some people, their native language is much friendlier to them in terms of, their vocabulary and really understanding, especially like ballot initiatives where, it requires you to really understand what's being said. In terms of candidates, a lot of times I see voters, they bring in their mail ballot and they'll bring it in on election day, and that kind of helps them through the process. So they maybe sat down with someone and someone helped them and assisted them to understand maybe who were the candidates who most represented their represented them or whatever it may be. So that I know that I've seen that in the past, that's helped. But definitely voting in their native language is very helpful, and it makes them feel more confident about the choices they make when they vote.
Boy, when you mention ballot initiatives, I know when I read the ballot initiatives, the language can be so convoluted, and the difference between the pro and the con, and I could see having it in your native language would really help, because the differences are so difficult to understand sometimes. Let me ask in terms of historically, so you can either vote by mail, you can vote early voting, or you can vote on election days. What percentage of people in the past chose to vote those different ways, Mark?
An excellent question. And what I can do is I have the 2020 general election statistics right here in front of me that I'll use. So during the 2020 general election, at the time we had 1.8 million active registered voters. Of those 1.8 million voters, 78% took part in the 2020 general election cycle. So a little more than 1.4 million. Of those 1.4 million, it was approximately 48% that returned a mail ballot. Again, and when I say return mail ballot, that means either put it back into the mailbox and allow the mail system to bring it to the clerk, or even in some cases hand delivered that mail ballot, which is acceptable as well. And that was, again, about 48%. In-person voting during early voting was approximately 40%. So a little under 600,000 individuals. And then on election day, and this I think might surprise some folks, it was only about 11%. So about 155,000 individuals voted in person on election day during the 2020 general election. Of course, 2020 was an odd year, I think is the polite way to say it. But we anticipate approximately that same level of turnout, as well as involvement across the spectrum of voting methods this year.
Well, I'm hoping we see a good turnout. Midterm elections, as we know, sometimes have a lower turnout, but we really need people to make their voice heard. Maite, you may not have real facts and statistics on that, but do you think those numbers were similar for the Hispanic community in terms of how people chose to vote in 2020?
Yes, and I don't have the 2020, but it does show, of course, in general, that midterm elections, the voter turnout is much lower than presidential. But by far, Hispanics seem to have a lower turnout in general as an ethnic group in terms of just any voting. So I think that there's huge potential in the Hispanic community to get the vote out, to have their voices heard.
Yeah, I think that's important, and people need to know midterms are just as important. It's just as important. Let's talk for a minute. You talked about the closed primary, and I think a lot of people don't have a good understanding of what that really means and how that impacts when they get a ballot, who's going to be on it, who's not going to be on it, or when they go to the polling place. So my question is, if someone is registered as a nonpartisan, so if they don't register as a Democrat, if they don't register as a Republican or an independent, is their ballot going to have those races? Will they, in the primary, will they be able to vote for the governor or Senate or those candidates?
And Barry, that's a great question as well. So the very short answer is no. You're right. If an individual is currently registered as a nonpartisan, then they will receive that county-specific nonpartisan ballot, which will not have, it may even be surprising to individuals who receive it. The county I live in, the number of races on my nonpartisan ballot, there's really only two. And in fact, one of them is running unopposed. So again, you're right. If an individual either receives a ballot as a registered nonpartisan and realizes that's maybe they had intended to change back to a different party or wanted to commit to a major party or not for the primary, there still is an opportunity. Again, of course, if you cast a ballot, then that is your opportunity. You certainly cannot vote more than once. But with that ballot in hand, uncast, again, reach out to your county election official and explain to them what's going on. And they have the ability to, from where they're at, cancel that mail ballot and can support and assist you in changing your party affiliation. And then depending on the timeline, or we're getting close to it, but either reissue you a new ballot, or even if an individual wishes to come vote in person, they can do that as well and vote on that party, the major party ballot. But that's a very key part of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are new to our state don't understand what a closed primary means. And while the auto voter registration through the Department of Motor Vehicles really helped to get people registered, I think a lot of people, for whatever reason they decided to register nonpartisan. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is the numbers of nonpartisan voters has really skyrocketed. And I'm really afraid a lot of those people who are new to our state are going to get their mail ballot or go to the polls and say, hey, I see all these commercials for the Senate race, the governor's race, all these races. Why aren't they there? So that's really good. So they can actually go to the polling place or contact their county clerk and change their registration to vote in those races. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. And then that's for the primary. Again, rest assured, for the general election, all the full spectrum of races will be available for everyone to vote upon, again, regardless of their party affiliation. But
okay,
you brought up a very good point for the primary.
Okay, so for the primary, if let's say somebody really wants to vote for the Senate race or the governor's race, but they're nonpartisan, they could change their registration, but then later change it back to
That is
nonpartisan.
correct.
But
That
then
is
in the
correct.
regular election, they would be able to vote for all the candidates.
That's correct.
I think that's really good. That's really good for people to know. That's really good for people to know. So I guess another question that I wanted to know is, we talked about mail ballots, and I know mail ballots you can drop in the mail. Can you talk about the deadline for dropping it in the mail, but also how else can people turn in a mail ballot?
Certainly. No, another great question. There's a couple ways that you can return a mail ballot. First of all, as you mentioned, you can put it into the mail stream. That really, it needs to be postmarked before the close of polls, or really by the end of election day, so June 14th. Again, important to note, because if you live maybe in a location where your mailbox is only picked up by the postal service, at 11 a.m., for example, but you drop that mail ballot into it at 1 p.m. After the pickup has occurred on the 14th, and it doesn't get picked up or stay basically stamped until the following day, the 15th, that ballot will not count. So it has to be postmarked by election day. And then it'll get to, as long as it gets to the county clerk, to the registrar of the clerk's office, by the 4th day after the election. Then it will be considered timely and will be counted. And I mention that because in some cases, I've heard of individuals who received the mail ballot. This occurred in the 2020 election cycle. There was a similar but different timeline, but then they left on vacation and they said, well, as long as that's postmarked by election day, it should be fine. And they're not realizing that when they then went on vacation on the other side of the world, that timeline extended, of course, and increased the risk that the ballot may not get back in time. So on the one hand, again, making sure that if you are going to mail it back, that it is postmarked by election day, that's important. And then the county clerks will be looking for those and accepting ballots up to the 4th day after. The other way, again, if that becomes too much of a concern, or as it gets closer to the deadline on election day, you can always just bring it into your county clerk as well. They have drop boxes set up at voting locations across your county. And those locations are actually included on a website that I'm about to copy into the chat real fast. So if you go to the early voting sites, again, that I just dropped into the chat, any of the counties, you'll notice that the document that comes up has the polling locations as well as the drop box locations. You can either put that mail ballot into a drop box, or you can bring it directly to the county seat, to the clerk's or registrar's office, and turn it in that way, and that will work as well.
So let me ask about dropping it in the mail. There are some people that think the mail is safe and secure. Some other people are concerned about that. So I'm glad that there's drop boxes, other places people can bring them. So Maite, let me ask you about the multicultural communities. Do you think that's an issue? Do you think they would prefer to actually hand it to someone, put it in a drop box, as opposed to putting it in a mailbox and not being sure where it's going to go from there?
I think culturally, because many of our ancestors, especially from Hispanic countries, are untrusting of the political election process in their home countries. So it's definitely handing it to someone in person. There's more reassurance that it's actually going to get counted. Plus, in other countries, they're not accustomed to the mail-in ballot. So they're accustomed to actually presenting at a polling place with an ID to present their vote. So it's just a different process, and so culturally, people are used to a different system. So they're used to presenting in person. So I think they're more comfortable culturally.
So we have a question in the chat, and someone asked if they could take their mom's ballot. Could they turn in their mom's ballot?
Yes, absolutely. That was another change that came out of the 2021 legislative session. It is now possible for an individual to bring others' ballots. Again, if they're authorized to bring it, you can. You can't sneak it out of your mom's purse and take it. But if you're authorized to return that ballot, yes, you are absolutely able to return the ballot.
Okay, let me ask another question. And there's somebody asked about ballot harvesting, and I think that's a different thing. Could you talk about that for a moment?
Certainly. In the question, to answer it directly, will ballot harvesting be illegal in Nevada this election? The simple answer is yes. That was another change that came out of the 2021 legislative session. Previously, before 2020, and really it was from the primary and before, it was illegal to take other individuals' ballots that were not necessarily, like there was a very small limited group of people that you could, like you bring your parents or your spouses, but outside of family, you really weren't allowed to. But that there's been a change to the law. So the way it works now is that if you go to see your grandmother and her roommate at the home that she lives in or in her apartment asks you to take it, yes, you can bring those as well. There are, again, organizations that will be trying to collect up. Church groups have reached out and expressed interest in gathering some of their congregations' ballots, or at least offering an opportunity. I will tell you that the one concern that for individuals that are interested in taking either their family members or friends' ballots, there is a stipulation now under the law where if somebody authorizes you to return their mail ballot, you have 3 days to return it from the time they hand it to you. If you're within 3 days of the election, so again, 3 days leading up to the election, you really have until the close of polls on election day to get it. So again, that 3-day rule isn't hard and fast. If someone hands you a ballot on June 12th, it's by June 14th that you have to turn that ballot in as well. So those are important dates to be aware of.
So we talked about the drop boxes, and the drop boxes will be at the county clerks. They'll be at the voting locations for early voting, and they'll be on election day. You know, I remember seeing during the last election that there were other organizations that set up a drop box and that said official drop box. Is that allowed, or is that like something that people should be really leery of?
You know, what we tell folks is, one, official drop boxes are only set up by your county election officials. So that's kind of a good starting point. Two is that, you know, at the end of the day, when you think about the absolute importance of your vote and your voice and how that just absolutely sacred that ballot is, you know, it's one thing if you want to entrust it to another group or organization, entirely up to you. But we encourage folks to bring it directly to those official polling locations that are listed on our website, on the sites that we talked about, or that are directly related to your county clerk or registrar, just to be safe and to make sure that nothing nefarious happens.
So early voting comes around. I either want to take my mail ballot or I want to go vote in person. The same for election day. How can I find out where all the in-person voting sites are going to be?
Same exact website that I just posted with the early voting sites. That page actually will be updated to reflect the election day sites as well. So again, when you look at that page, there's a list of the counties by early voting. You click on it, the page that will pop up will have the addresses of the early voting locations and another tab that has the mail ballot drop box locations. And there'll be a new document for some, in many cases, expanded opportunities on election day as well.
I've heard that the early voting sites might have different times, like hours of operation or times or all that. Could you talk about that for a second? Because that's unusual for people who might not expect that.
Right, certainly. Again, and you'll notice, not to sound like a broken record, but at that same link in the same document that comes up with the addresses, it will also have the times for each location as well. And again, when in doubt, if you want to confirm it, never hurts to reach out to the county clerk or registrar, call them beforehand just to make sure, double check on our site to make sure that the times are still valid before going by. Absolutely.
Okay. What's being done for people who are elderly or disabled and let's say they can't stand in line? I've heard there's processes in place to help people because, you know, I've heard stories of people that go stand in a long line and they say, I just can't wait. I have to go home now. No, what can be done for those?
And that's an excellent question as well. Again, if you're concerned about standing in line for a period of time, certainly reach out to your clerk or registrar in advance. Most of them, I believe, and talking to them, will make accommodations. I know from talking to Mr. Joe Gloria down in Clark County, for example, that they oftentimes will move. If somebody identifies, hey, you know, I'm in a position where I'm not really able to stand for long periods of time, they may move them right to the front of the line to give them head of line privileges. Just so that there are no risks with their health or capabilities. And again, really, you know, when in doubt, reach out to the clerks is a great starting point. There was also the passage of Assembly Bill 121, so that if anybody that is, you know, a member of the disabled community and is curious about what other options are available, certainly encourage them to reach out to us at nvelect@sos.nv.gov, and I'll put these into the chat as well. or to give us a call at 775-684-5705. Assembly Bill 121 authorized the members of the disabled community to cast a ballot through the Effective Absentee System for Elections, or EASE, a process originally set up for military and overseas voters. Again, it's just another one of the opportunities and methods to support Nevadans' ability to cast a ballot, in a very efficient manner.
Do people need to bring ID with them if they go to vote?
In some cases, if they didn't provide their appropriate information when they registered online or within a certain period of time, you may need to bring ID. But in those cases, again, the clerk or registrar's office will be, they're very proactive in making sure that you understand if you need to bring an ID, or even on your mail ballot. In some cases, it may say on the mail ballot, please provide a copy of your ID when you return this. But they're very, overt lettering and that sort of notification is something that is very deliberate. So that in the rare situations where that does come up, individuals are able to identify that.
So for the most part, at the state of Nevada, voter ID is not necessary to vote.
That's correct.
Okay, let me ask Maite a question about that. I know that different communities have different problems or barriers to getting official ID. Can you mention that and how that may be a problem and what people can do and what other forms of ID might be acceptable?
Yes, so I actually have a list. I have a list in front of me. But yeah, what's nice about both the Nevada Secretary of State and the Clark County Registrar's Office, that much of the information is available in Spanish. It's also available in Tagalog. So the resources are available so that people can know exactly what's needed when the voting, it has the poll locations, it has the types of IDs that are acceptable, especially like with provisional voting on same day, if someone is registering on that same day. But some of the IDs can be complicated because we have people who are from countries where they have to request their birth certificate because they have to show a birth certificate, in these other countries, they actually will redraft birth certificates. So it gets a little complicated because sometimes there's a misspelling in the name, and just a misspelling in the name can create a problem for someone who's showing that as proof or evidence of an ID. So it does get a little complicated. There is a long list of types of IDs that you can show, but of course, some of the most basic ones are, a Nevada driver's license. But in order to have a Nevada driver's license, you have to have either a Social Security, a birth certificate to establish your legal residence. So it can get sometimes complicated.
Okay, talking about the mail ballots again. So I put my mail ballot in the mail. And I'm just kind of curious, how can I find out that it's been received and or that it's been counted? How do I know that?
So there's two ways, really. One is to check online, and I will include that link here in a second. And then two, again, contacting your county clerk or registrar and asking directly, and they'll be able to provide you information too. Now, you said a word, though, that I keyed in on, right? The question is, when will my vote be counted? And so I want to clarify, right? There's a kind of a series of different, almost technical sort of changes here. On the one hand, right, when you send it in or when you cast a ballot in person, that process to tabulate is one in which we gather the information from across the state through a secure process and make sure that, again, there's no changes or discrepancies. Those numbers will be released, the initial ones, on election night after all polling locations have closed. But ultimately, the real true kind of quote unquote counting of your vote occurs when the county commissioners of your county or board of supervisors in Carson meet no later than the 10th day after the election to certify that vote. So that truly is the day when, again, everyone across the state will get vote history, and it will update accurately to reflect that, yes, your ballot is counted and you've participated in the 2022 election cycle, excuse me. And that kind of gets me into another quick segue that, while I have a moment, the timelines are very important. And we've been talking about mail ballots, and we've been talking about the different processes to return them. But I do want to stress to everyone that it's not as simple as as you turn in your mail ballot into the mailbox and then, shut your mind off from elections for the rest of the year. There is the possibility that when your mail ballot arrives at the clerk's office, one of the very first things they're going to do is scan the barcode on that ballot to pull up your voter registration file. The very first thing they're going to do then is compare the signature on the envelope of that ballot to the signature that you have on file. And if there's any questions at all, they're going to set your ballot to the side and put it into a signature curing process, is what it's called. The signature curing process is really an opportunity for the clerk to reach out to you, the voter, to confirm that this is in fact your signature. A lot of our signatures change over time. Sometimes if I have to sign a document, kids are rushing around the house and maybe you're distracting me, or it's the end of the day, there could be significant differences in my signature from the morning to the afternoon. So this signature curing process is important to be aware of, because if you do receive a notification from your county election official, it's imperative that you reach out to them, to contact them, and to follow up. And that signature curing timeline is going to occur really from the first time mail ballots are sent out. If they receive it, in the next couple of days, and they will begin the signature curing process if applicable. But it can continue through the 6th day after the election, right? So 6 days after the election, they can still attempt to conduct that signature curing process. So I do just, again, want to remind everyone that if you hear that you are on the list of individuals for signature curing, that you be mindful of that and you be ready to notify and contact your county election official, because the simple fact is, if you don't, your ballot will not be counted. And that happened during the 2020 election cycle, and it's certainly something that we worked very hard to avoid. But that's an important step in the process that, again, like you had mentioned, maybe folks weren't familiar with from before, or maybe had moved here from out of state and didn't realize that we had.
What if you forget to sign the ballot? Will the same thing happen?
It will. Same thing.
you?
If there's no signature on it, again, that barcode, when they scan the envelope, when it first arrives, it will be treated the same way.
So remember to sign your ballot, and remember how you signed your registration is a good way to put that. So
Absolutely.
let's talk about redistricting a little bit. And I know the Secretary of State's office doesn't have a whole lot to do with that, but the lines have been drawn and they're very different. So I know, the Senate race, the state the federal senator is the same because it's the entire state, but the congressional district, the House of Representatives, those districts are all different. So people may be in different districts and may not realize that. They may not heard that, it used to be that this was my congressman, but now all of a sudden this will be my congresswoman. Is there a place people can go to find out what district they're in?
There absolutely is. And it's there in the chat. If you go to the Secretary of State's webpage, that lists not only the county precinct maps, but that second sentence down that talks about additional maps may be found on the Nevada Legislature's redistricting page. That's got a link directly to the legislative page that has an interactive map for the congressional districts and everything else that you just mentioned as well. So from a big picture all the way down to the county specific districts, all of that information is located there.
Yeah. And people need to know it's not just the House of Representatives, all of the state Senate, all of the state assembly, county races, it's a whole lot different. And I guess the best way to put it is you can complain about it, but it's not going to change. These have already been decided. So you need to just kind of know, well, this has been the person I voted for before, now it's somebody else. And you may not find that out until you get your ballot.
That's a great point. And we've been asked recently, what's the point of redistricting? I think that maybe helps explain a little bit about it. We have, again, limits on the number of state senators and assemblymen and women that we're allowed to have. Our assemblymen and women are each allocated an even number of people to represent, approximately 40,000. I can't remember the exact number offhand, with our state senators having exactly twice that amount. So again, as we look over the last 10 years from the previous census to now, the amount of changes that we as a state have received, and people moving into certain areas and different counties getting much larger and others growing, but at a slower rate, the redistricting process is intended to redraw the lines so that your representatives all represent an even number of individuals as close as possible across the state. And that's really the impetus of the redistricting process.
Right. I know a few years ago, Congressional District 3 had the largest population of any congressional district in the country because that part of the Las Vegas Valley grew so much in the 10 years. So I think that's kind of interesting. At this point, I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to give some closing remarks, talk about what you think people might need to know, encouraging people to go out, make your voice heard. Please go ahead, Maite. You've been a little quieter during some of this discussion because Mark has such a wealth of information. So I'm going to let you go first and give us some closing comments today. Thank you.
Oh, I think it is extremely important for people to vote, regardless of your background or ethnicity. I think that it's becoming increasingly important for people to become activated in the political process, particularly in the Hispanic community, which has had a lower turnout, all in the midterms and in the general. A lot of times we found that people participate in the general elections more so than in the midterms. But they don't understand how midterm elections with local offices, how they directly impact their life every day. So I think it is important to have greater education for all communities about what these local offices, what they represent, how they represent you, so that people become more aware of the importance of voting.
Absolutely, making their voice heard. Mark, any closing comments today?
Yes, sir. Thank you. First of all, thank you again for inviting me on here today. Every opportunity we have, especially nowadays, to answer questions, to get information out, is one that we will eagerly jump at. So I will throw a couple of things here into the chat. Finally, one, if anybody has any questions about the election locations, timelines, processes, anything, again, please reach out to us. We're going to continue to update the 2022 election information page that I just put into the chat. So that's going to be a one-stop shop for, again, all things elections. There'll be links on that site to the voting locations, to turnout, to everything on that one site. And we'll continue to put new information at the top of the page so that we don't have to come back and kind of scroll through it and look to see if anything's changed. We'll make it clear and easy and accessible for you. And then finally, again, if there's ever any questions at all about elections, about the election processes, again, we're a nonpartisan office. The bottom line is we support the needs of all 1.8 million registered voters and the 3.2-ish Nevadans that their votes impact directly. And while, as I mentioned from the start, there's a lot of unique information on social media, on the national news, the reality is, if you have questions about how Nevada conducts elections, I encourage you to reach out to us or to your county clerk or registrar, and we will absolutely be able to provide you real information, the truth for us here that impacts us Nevadans. So I'll put that into the chat. But again, thank you so much for having me on today.
Well, I'd like to thank both of our guests. I'd like to thank everybody who listened in. AARP has a long history of voter engagement. It's voter engagement. We're not here to educate anyone, just to inform them on what their options are and how they can make their voice heard. So I want to thank everyone. We'll be doing more of these as we move forward to the general election. We'll be doing telephone town halls where we have people on and we can answer your questions live on the phone. We'll be doing more of these webinars. And we also have a web page that has some Nevada specific information, and that is www.aarp.org/NV votes, VOTES. And we have something new. You can actually text. You can text NV votes, NVVOTES to 22277 and get Nevada specific information, or in Spanish, we actually have something NV Votar or NV VOTAR to 22277, and there's information in Spanish. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Mr. Wlaschin and Ms. Salazar for joining us. I think this has been a great opportunity to learn more, and I'm hoping everybody gets out, makes their voice heard, and votes in the primary election. Thank you so much. And thanks to Charlie Shepard, our volunteer state president, who set all this up and watched everything and make sure we knew what we were doing. So as somebody said they couldn't get the last information, I am known to talk very fast. My boss is going to tell me that after this. She's going to say, I told you, Barry, to slow down. You can text NV VOTES or NV votes to 22277, or in Spanish, it's NV. There you go. Aaron's putting it in the chat. That's NV votar to 22277, and you can get information there as well. So again, everyone, have a great afternoon. It's your opportunity to vote however you choose, whether you choose to vote by mail, whether you choose to go by the drop boxes, or whether you're going to vote in person. Please go out and make your voice heard. Thank you so much. And this concludes our broadcast today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.